Hilchos Bechoros Perek Revi, the laws of the firstborn, chapter 4. This class is also being pre-recorded for Simchas Torah, second day of the holiday, the most joyous day in the Jewish calendar. Still got to do Rambam. It's a very busy day, actually, one of the busiest days, especially this year. Simchas Torah is on a Friday. So you have, in Chabad, you have to do Chitas for the whole V'zei Sabracha and the whole Bereshis, and the Shnai Mikra of Bereshis, and there's just the whole davening, which takes forever with Kiddush and Akafis. And we got to still find time to do the daily study of Rambam. So, while we're pre-recording it, we're also going to have the shir on Simchat Torah itself, just before Shabbos comes in. And you know what? No better way to rejoice with the Torah than also to study some Torah. So here we are, studying some halacha on Simchas Torah. This chapter is going to be generally about two topics. First of all, the fact that Bechor, the laws of the firstborn, only apply to Jewish-owned animals. Once a non-Jew has some kind of ownership, it disqualifies the whole animal from the Bechor obligation. And the intricacies we'll deal with at what point is a goy considered to be owning the animal. And at the end, we're going to discuss also the qualifications of birth. At what point is an animal considered to have birthed the Bechor in the sense that it becomes holy, and in what cases is it not considered fully birthed, and then the animal is of course not sanctified as a Bechor. So we begin with the laws relating to a non-Jew. Halacha Aleph, behemas hashutfin chayeves bivchora. First of all, if there's two Jews that are in partnership and own an animal together, it's still obligated in the firstborn obligation. Lo nemar bekorcha v'tzeinecha, even though Torah uses the word your cattle, your sheep in the singular, which would seem to imply that partners are out, that's not the exclusion here. The exclusion here is l'mayid shutfus hagoy. That's there to exclude partnership of a Gentile. If a Gentile was a partner in the mom, the cow, or in the fetus, even if the non-Jew only had 1,000th of the mom or 1,000th of the fetus, that's how much he owned. He is exempt. This animal is exempt from the laws of the firstborn. What if it wasn't a percentage? What if the guy owned a specific part of the animal? A specific limb. It could go in yad or rega, like a hand or a foot. Rayin. So we have to check. If that specific limb were it to be cut off, would that classify the animal as a blemished animal? That means that the part that the guy owns is important, significant. So it's exempt from the firstborn laws. If it's possible for the limb owned by the guy to be cut off and it will not disqualify the animal, then it is still liable in the laws of the firstborn. What's an example of this? The commentaries say maybe there was an extra finger or an extra toe over and above the normal number, and that's what the guy owned. You cut that off, the animal actually is not blemished now. So that would be a case where the animal would still remain in Jewish possession and would be obligated in the laws of Bechira. Halacha Bey is halikeach ubar parasei shel goy. If a Jew buys the fetus of a goy's cow, so there's a cow owned by a Gentile, and there's a fetus that's now owned by the Jew. The Jew wants to buy it. Or a Jew owns a cow, and he sells the fetus of his cow to a goy. Even though it's not allowed, there's already a fetus in pregnancy, and it's going to be born if you leave it just to its fate. It's going to be born as a regular Bechor. Now you sold it, it's not allowed. Bottom line is now a guy owns it. It's exempt from the laws of Bechira. We don't even fine him for this. It's just you've brought about a situation where the Bechor is now exempted. Halacha Gimel hamekabel behema min hagoy. If a person receives an animal from a Gentile on contract, the deal is the Jew takes care of the animal, and any babies born will be split as profit, so to speak, equally between them. Or a Gentile receives such a deal from a Jew. You take care of the animal, all babies will be split between us. These animals are exempt from the firstborn laws. Because it says, Petar kol rechem bivnei Yisrael, sanctify for me all firstborns that open the womb in the Jewish people. Ad sheyiyah hakol mi Yisrael, which means it has to be fully owned by a Jew and not partially owned by a Gentile. Even in the case of like this financing situation where it's not a direct ownership, still called an ownership. If a person accepts sheep from a Gentile at a fixed rate, That means that the non-Jew is giving the animal to the Jew for a given amount of money to be returned after a certain amount of time. That's what this concept means. Upasak imay, and the deal is sheyiyeh haschar beinehem, that all profits made during this time will be split equally. V'im pichasu pichasu liyisrael, but all losses will be incurred by the Jew. So please follow the deal here. It's the guy's sheep. The Jew is paying the guy for the rights to own the sheep for a little bit and do some investments, deals, have children, whatever it is. All profits that accrue will be split evenly. All losses fully on the Jew. Even though right now they're in the Jew's possession, and they are like his ownership. Still, since if the Gentile will not find in the end any money to collect his debt, he will collect from these animals and from their children. That converts it into a case where the Gentile has somewhat of a lien on the Jews' animals here and their babies, which means the guy's hand is in between here. And so all the animals in question here, the mothers and the babies, are exempt from the laws of firstborn. But the grandchildren will be liable to Bechoros if they are a firstborn, because those are for sure the Jews. The guy has no part in them at all. He can't have any claim to them, there's no stake, and therefore it's fully the Jews, they're liable to Bechoros. Halacha hey, Yisrael shenasan mois legoy, you have a Jew who gave money to a Gentile. V'kanale bahen behema migoy. And the Gentile uses the money and buys an animal from another Gentile, bidinehem, using the Gentile laws. What does this mean? Small introduction. Biblically speaking, when you give money for an object, the object becomes yours. Transaction is complete. However, the rabbi saw that the seller, once he got the money, didn't care about getting the product to the buyer safely, because he has the money. So the rabbis instituted a special protection for the buyer that the transaction is not complete till Mashiach happens, till the buyer actually pulls the object into his possession. But that was only instituted for Jews, not for Gentiles. They follow the regular law that money effectuates the transaction. So the Jew gave the Gentile money. The Gentile is doing a transaction with another Gentile on behalf of the Jew. Even though he didn't pull the animal into his possession, the transaction has been completed and the animal now belongs to the Jew fully, because the Goy was the Jew's agent, and belonging to the Jew, it's liable to the laws of firstborn. Same thing if a Gentile buys something from a Jew using the Goy's laws, and he gives the money, even if there's no pulling, that's a full transaction. Now it's owned by a Gentile. At this point, it's exempt from the laws of firstborn. Halacha vav, gershon is gayer, if a convert converts, ve'en yodua, and now he has an animal that gave birth to a firstborn. But ve'en yodua, you don't know, im ad shalen is gayer yolda parasai, did his cow give birth before he converted, so it was a Gentile animal owned, and therefore it's exempt. Oy achashin is gayer, or after the conversion, and therefore it's a Jewish animal, and therefore it's obligated in Bechor. Hareze Bechor misafik, the animal is considered to be a doubtful firstborn. Zayin halekech behema min hagoy. A person buys an animal from a Gentile, ve'en yodua im bikra le bikra, and you don't know if this animal has previously given birth or not. Of course, if it has previously given birth, then even if it's owned by a Jew, there's no laws of Bechor. But if it's a first-time birther, that's a Jewish animal having a Bechor, it's going to be obligated in Bechor. The Yolda etzla, and it indeed gives birth in the hands of the Jew. Harez a fake Bechor, so it's a doubt. The achel b'mumay labailim, and the owner gets to keep it, waits till it gets a blemish, and then you can eat it. Doesn't go to the Kohen. Whenever you have a doubt, the person who wants to extract, the onus of proof is on him. This is going to be discussed tomorrow extensively, many cases of doubt. The principle always is the same. When there's in doubt, whoever retains possession keeps it. You want to get it out of me, you have to prove that it's yours. In this case, the Kohen would have to prove that the animal never gave birth before. If a person buys a nursing animal from a Gentile, no need to suspect that it's nursing a different baby, not its own, and maybe it never gave birth before. If it's nursing, it's presumed to have given birth. Even if the animal that it's nursing looks different, even if it looks like a pig, that's exempt from the firstborn laws. Also, if a cow is giving milk, it's exempt from the firstborn laws. The assumption is animals cannot give milk unless they have previously given birth. So the animal is considered to be already out of the status of Bechor. If a person buys an animal from another Jew, it can be assumed to have already given birth, unless the Jew tells you explicitly that it has not given birth yet. The Jew wouldn't be quiet and thereby cause the other Jew to eat holy meat outside the temple. Obviously, it already had a child, and therefore he sold it without stipulating anything. Halacha Yud, behema daka shehipila ubar. An ovine, a thin animal, gives birth or actually miscarries a fetus. But the fetus is in its early stages of gestation and it hasn't yet clarified its form. It's not obvious to everybody. This is called in halacha tinuf. The word tinuf means dirt, but it's a term to describe an undeveloped animal fetus. Im amru harayim ubarhu. If the shepherds definitively say this is an embryo, this is a fetus, and its form was just destroyed, at this point forward, the animal that birthed or miscarried this fetus is exempt from any future firstborn laws. But you must show it to a sage shepherd, not a regular shepherd. Therefore, if a person buys an animal from a Gentile, even if it was small, and it gives birth by the Jew during the year, it's always a doubt. Maybe it had miscarried a tinuf in the hands of the Gentile and you wouldn't know. That's all for an ovine. For a bovine, the thicker, the bigger animals, if they miscarry a placenta, the placenta itself is a sign of a child. For there can be no placenta without a baby. Obviously there's a baby there. Maybe it disintegrated, maybe it was miscarried, but it was there. And therefore, it becomes exempt from future firstborn laws. And there's a special law here that you're allowed to throw that placenta to the dogs. You don't have to treat it as holy. Because think about this. What are the chances that there was an actual male baby here? Less than 50%. Follow this chart, please. The only animal which becomes holy is a fully male animal if it's firstborn. The chezkas haneladim, mechtzas charim or mechtzas nekebes. By default, we presume that it's 50-50, whether an animal is going to be born male or female. Ukvar be'arnu, we also already explained, shahazachar she'ein by miktzas simanei imai einei miskadesh b'bcheira. That there can be a scenario where there's a male that has none of the identifying signs similar to its mom, and therefore it wouldn't become holy. So now you have really, let's call it 2% of deformed males. Which means that as a total theme, it's the minority of all those animals being born that are going to actually become holy as firstborns. We don't have to worry for a minority. And therefore the placenta could be treated as unholy. Probably came from a female, or 52% of non-males. But were this to be the same scenario for a regular sacrifice, it miscarries a placenta, tikar, you simply bury it, because for holy status, we don't care if it's male or female. For Bechor, it has to be a male. But for regular sacrifices, it can be male or female, it doesn't make a difference. And therefore, in all cases, you must bury that placenta. Halacha Yud Aleph, behema gasa shehipila chararas dam. If a bovine, a thicker animal, miscarries a clot of blood, that's exempt from now going forward from firstborn laws. Tragically, we can presume that there was a baby inside and the blood just overpowered it, and disintegrated it and nullified it. The and we would bury this clot as though we would bury a miscarried fetus of an animal that had given birth the first time, even though it's not actually holy. Why do we bury it? To make a big stink out of it, to publicize the matter, not everyone should know that this animal is exempt from future firstborn laws. Yud Beis, we already explained in the topic of nida, in the context of the human reproduction, that a human fetus, a human embryo is fully formed after 40 days from conception. And therefore, if a woman miscarries before 40 days, it's not a baby and has no halachic status of a birth. That's only for humans. Aval vlad behema, but when it comes to animals, le'amdu chachamim al minyan hayamim sheyigamer boy. The sages did not know with precision the number of days that an embryo is fully formed. What did they say? Aval amru, they only have one thing that we know for sure. Shama peles tinuf, if an animal miscarries an undeveloped fetus, eina misaberes achra, v'lei mekabel vlad acher lepaches mishleishim yom. It cannot become pregnant again with another baby less than 30 days later. That's all we can know. Halacha Yud Gimel, behema sheyatzam maleo barei kanis, if an animal leaves us full, last thing we know it's pregnant, shows back up on the farm empty, as though it gave birth. Haba achar kein b'cher misafik. So clearly it miscarried, but we don't know what it miscarried. So the next baby is a doubtful b'cher. Shema davar she'enei paiter b'b'chera hipila. Because maybe it miscarried something which would not exempt it from the future firstborn laws. For example, says the Rambam, miscarried fetuses are not considered to have opened the womb until their head crowns at the size of what's called the warp. One of the rollers that were used for weaving had a certain size and a round size, and if the animal doesn't crown in that way, it's not considered to be opening the womb. So for example, maybe it miscarried in that way, and therefore it's not exempt. So you don't know. And you can't assume that it's totally exempt, therefore the next animal is a doubtful b'cher. Yudalid mevakeres hamekasha leilet. An animal giving birth for the first time, unfortunately, is having trouble giving birth. Mechatich ever umashlich laklavim. You're allowed to cut off limb by limb of the emerging fetus, throw it to the dogs. V'haba achrav b'cher, and the animal that comes afterwards is considered to be a firstborn, because the first one wasn't fully born. Yatsa rube, but if most of the first fetus comes out, hareze yikaver, it must be buried. V'niftara min abchera. That's already an exemption from future firstborn. V'imchatach ever v'hinichai ever v'hinichai. If the person overseeing this procedure was cutting off limb by limb but putting them down, so they accumulated, until they accumulated to most of the animal, so all the limbs do need to be buried, and it's exempted from future firstborn laws. Because once most of it emerged, whether complete or cut, and it's before us, retroactively it becomes holy. Let's say a third of the animal emerged in this troubling, hard birth, and once a third emerged, you sold that third to a goy. Now the second third comes out, and there's now a majority of the animal out. It becomes holy retroactively, and it's exempt from b'cher. If a third of the animal came out via C-section, and the other 2/3 naturally via the womb, that's not holy. Because the first majority, the first 2/3, didn't come out fully through the womb. And it has to become holy retroactively. In this case, it does not. Let's say the fetus was kind of a little bit deformed. One big limb exits, and that big limb itself constitutes the majority of the fetus. It's exempt from future b'cher laws, and whatever came out should be buried. If half the fetus emerged, but it's the majority of the current limb that's on the way out, this is a doubt. Maybe it's exempt, maybe it's not. Therefore, what comes after it is a doubt whether it's a firstborn. Yud Zayin, the Rambam delineates a bunch of kind of unusual cases related to b'cher. B'cher shekrachei b'siv. If a firstborn was on the way out, and you wrapped it in palm bast, and you took it out without touching the walls of the womb. Or you wrapped it with the placenta of a different animal. Or it was surrounded by a twin and came out. This is actually a very rare condition that exists even till today. It's called fetus in fetu, where there's a twin that's wrapped around by another twin. The twin inside never survives, but if it's a bechor, in this case, if it's a firstborn animal, there could be some ramifications here. And the animal comes out. As long as it didn't touch the walls of the womb, it's only a doubt whether it's a bechor. Yudches, a highly unusual case. A person puts two wombs of two animals next to each other. The animal exits one and enters the other. So the first one for sure had a bechor. The animal itself is a bechor. The question is the second animal. It's a doubt. Did this new animal which the bechor entered, does it now become exempt from bechor in the future? For its womb was opened. Or it's not exempt till its own baby opens its own womb. Yutes, another case, niftichu kasle besarechem biyatza, if the birth canal walls opened so wide, and the animal just went out with the airspace, it didn't touch the birth canal. How is a suffix? It's a doubt. Im nigias rechem mekadesha sayavira. Does it have to touch the birth canal, or just being through the airspace itself makes it into a bechor? Chaf nekru kasle besarechem v'nislu b'tzavarei. If the animal pulled the walls of the uterus out with it, and they hung around its neck, so it never really, it exited the animal, but it didn't exit the birth canal. How is a suffix? It's a doubt. Im b'mkayim mekadesh. If the uterus only makes the animal holy if it's in its natural place, or even outside of its place. And the final halacha, chaf alif, nigmumu kasle besarechem. If the walls of the birth canal were worn down, and the animal emerged not touching the walls, because there is no walls, ein kadesh, the animal is not holy. Nifratz miktsasa, if only part of it was worn down, the oimid meruba ala parotz, and the standing part that remained was over and above the amount of the worn down part. The yatsa derech haparotz, when the animal came out, it only went out via the place that was worn down. Oishahaya haparotz meruba ala oimid, there was more worn down than standing. The yatsa derech haimid, but the animal went out touching the standing part of the uterus, of the birth canal. How does that fake bechor? In all these cases, doubtful bechor, where the law is always the same. The person in possession holds on to it, but if the Kohen will seize it, it becomes his, and you can't take it away from the Kohen.